Love is often described as pure, selfless, and eternal. But let's be honest, most of us eventually realize that's only part of the story. Machiavelli, writing 500 years ago, saw through that illusion. What we like to romanticize as love is, more often than not, a strategic game of power, survival, and resources. And that's not a modern discovery. It's been true throughout history. Think about it. Some of the greatest manipulators in history, queens, courtesans, concubines, were masters of turning desire into a weapon. They used attraction to secure wealth, status, and safety long before psychology came up with words like hypergamy. By the end of this series, you're going to see how attraction really works, not through a rose-colored lens, but through the sharp, unflinching perspective of a Renaissance strategist. Once you understand that, it's not about bitterness, it's about clarity. This knowledge becomes armor against being played, and a blueprint for how to navigate desire with strategy instead of blind faith. Picture Florence in 1513. A man sits in exile. His name is Niccolò Machiavelli. Once a respected diplomat, now disgraced, stripped of his position, he takes up his quill. But he isn't writing about love in the way poets and priests did. He isn't celebrating courtly romance or spiritual devotion. He's dissecting the raw machinery of human nature, desire, loyalty, betrayal, fear, ambition. He writes about power, not fairy tales. And in doing so, he exposes something society still struggles to admit: the truth about attraction. We've all been lied to, not just by romantic songs or Hollywood movies, but by the very structure of culture itself. From childhood, we're told that love is mystical, pure, even sacred, that women's desires are mysterious, unknowable, guided only by matters of the heart. Machiavelli would have laughed at that. He knew better, and he left us clues.
Here's a story. In Renaissance Venice, a wealthy nobleman falls deeply for a courtesan. He writes her poetry, showers her with jewels, begs her to leave her other patrons. She smiles, she whispers promises, she takes his gifts, but she never closes her other doors. She keeps her options open. To the nobleman, his love feels unique, sacred, irreplaceable. To her, it's a calculation. She isn't cruel, she's rational. Her survival depends on it. And Machiavelli would have scoffed at the nobleman's blindness. "He who builds on the people builds on mud," he wrote. In other words, if you trust emotional loyalty without structure, you're doomed. This isn't cynicism, it's clarity. Fast forward to today. A man spends months pursuing a woman, certain that his patience and devotion will be rewarded. Meanwhile, she's evaluating him, not only for his personality, but for his social standing, his resources, his influence. Sometimes she's aware of this, sometimes she isn't. It's often subconscious, but the calculation is happening. And when she chooses someone else, the man is crushed. "But I loved her," he says. Machiavelli's response? The wish to acquire is natural and common, and people will always do so when they can. Women, like men, are driven by self-interest. The difference is that society condemns men for openly admitting this, while women are expected, sometimes even encouraged, to optimize for security. Here's the key. When you accept this truth, the fog clears. You stop resenting the game, and you start understanding it. You learn to navigate it like a Medici prince, wielding influence not through brute force, but through knowledge.
Think back to the last time you were friend-zoned. Was it really about nice guys finishing last? Or was it because you failed to demonstrate value beyond being emotionally available? Machiavelli's insights predate modern evolutionary psychology. His famous question, Whether it is better to be loved or feared mirrors what studies now say about attraction and mate selection. It's not despair, it's empowerment. The nobleman with the courtesan could have kept his wealth, built his influence, and raised his status until he became undeniable. Instead, he spent it all on blind devotion. That's the difference between delusion and strategy. Now comes the uncomfortable question. Have you ever been the mark in this game? Have you ever given more than you received because you believed love alone would win the day? Machiavelli would force us to admit it. The man who blames women for gold digging is no different from the nobleman blaming the courtesan. Both refused to see the board they were playing on. Women aren't villains, they're players, and once you recognize the rules, you stop losing. But here's Machiavelli's most ruthless revelation. It's not really about women at all. It's about you. Because what happens when you realize your love was never the prize, but the price? To answer that, let's move to another story. Florence, 1502. Cesare Borgia, one of the most feared men in Italy, rides into the city with his personal executioner by his side. Bodies hang from the walls, rebels, traitors, men who underestimated him. The people whisper in terror. And yet when Borgia enters the piazza, women press forward, not in fear, but in fascination. Their eyes shine with something darker than admiration. Machiavelli saw this with his own eyes, and in that moment he understood what would become one of his most famous laws of power. It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. And this wasn't metaphor, it was a blueprint.
Let's talk about Marco. Marco is the kind of guy who does everything right. He's kind, he listens, he remembers anniversaries, brings soup when she's sick, and believes love is earned through service. He lives by the idea that if he gives enough, eventually she'll love him back with the same devotion. But when his girlfriend leaves him for a man who treats her with casual indifference, Marco is devastated. His question is the same one so many men ask, "But I did everything right. Why wasn't it enough?" Machiavelli would have given him a brutal but simple answer. The vulgar crowd is always taken by appearances. Marco's mistake wasn't his kindness, it was his misunderstanding of value. He confused love with utility. He believed usefulness created attraction. But women don't fall in love with useful, they fall in love with power. And nothing kills power faster than unconditional surrender. Think of the last time you saw a woman light up around a man who didn't cater to her. Notice how her voice pitched higher, how her laughter lingered, how her body angled toward him even when he wasn't paying attention. That's not cruelty, it's biology. Attraction isn't about service. It's about energy, presence, and the sense that someone has options. Machiavelli's world was full of lessons that mirror this truth. In 1515, King Francis I of France hosted a lavish banquet. But here's the trick. He didn't serve the best wine first. He served vinegar. Only after his guests grimaced did he bring out the vintage bottles of exquisite wine. Why? Because contrast creates value. Scarcity creates desire. Now imagine a man who pours out his affection freely, texting constantly, always available, offering emotional labor like cheap wine in endless supply. Compare him to another man who is scarce, unpredictable, whose attention has to be earned. Who do you think she'll chase? It's not about cruelty, it's about human nature. We don't value what flows freely, we value what's rare.
Machiavelli wrote, "Men are so simple and so much inclined to obey immediate needs that a deceiver will never lack victims. Women are no different. The man who demands nothing will receive nothing. The man who demands everything, he's remembered." And if you look at history's greatest love stories, you'll see the same pattern. Cleopatra and Antony, Tristan and Isolde, Romeo and Juliet. What do they have in common? They're tragedies.
The very obstacles, the very risks, the very boundaries are what fueled the obsession. Modern dating culture tells us the opposite, that accessibility equals connection. Swipe right, reply instantly, confess your feelings early, and what happens? A generation of people drowning in "why doesn't she respect me?" Machiavelli understood why. He knew that people are less hesitant to harm someone who makes himself loved than someone who makes himself feared. In other words, love without boundaries, without structure, without fear of loss, is disposable. In The Prince, he recounts how Duke Valentino executed a disloyal general, then displayed the body in the town square. The people were horrified, but rebellion ended overnight. Now here's the parallel in relationships. A woman tests a man's boundaries. He gives in. She tests again. He gives in again. Eventually, she's not impressed. She's bored. Not because she's cruel, but because he's shown her he has no line she can't cross. A man who cannot say no isn't truly loved. He's only used. That's why Machiavelli's lesson about fear wasn't about cruelty. It was about structure. Fear creates boundaries. Boundaries create respect, and respect sustains attraction in a way niceness never can.
Now let's connect this with something more modern. Think about the last time someone ghosted you after you went out of your way for them. Maybe you canceled your plans to help them move, or you bent over backward to prove you cared, and then they just disappeared. Machiavelli would have nodded knowingly. His principle was clear. Benefits should be conferred little by little so that they may be better enjoyed. Studies back this up. Research shows women are often more attracted to men whose feelings are ambiguous. Why? Because the fear of losing something spikes dopamine more than the certainty of gaining it. That's why slot machines are addictive. It's also why high-value men who remain slightly unpredictable become more desirable. This doesn't mean becoming a tyrant. It means understanding unpredictability creates interest. A man who can walk away, who truly doesn't need to cling, always holds the power. Machiavelli didn't write The Prince to create monsters. He wrote it to expose reality. When you stop begging for love and start commanding respect, everything shifts. Women don't want a servant. They want a challenge. And deep down, you already know this. Think about the moments when you were most desired. They weren't when you bent over backward to please. They were when you carried yourself with confidence, even danger. When you felt like you had something better to do. That energy? That's what people respond to. Not sacrifice, not compliance, but presence. But let's flip the script for a second. What happens when the roles are reversed? What happens when a woman holds the power over you? Machiavelli had an answer for that too, and it's one of his most dangerous ideas.
Let's move to Venice, 1525. A young diplomat pleads with his lover, a nobleman's wife, to leave her husband. She hesitates, not because of loyalty, but because of calculation. And the young man doesn't rage, he doesn't beg, he doesn't try harder. He disappears. No letters, no meetings, no whispered promises in the garden. For weeks, nothing. Then, one evening, she shows up at his door, breathless, shaken, her indifference shattered. Machiavelli chronicled games like these in his private letters. His conclusion? The more one shows himself, the less he is esteemed. This was what he saw as the nuclear weapon of attraction. Strategic withdrawal. Not sulking, not pouting, but a calculated retreat. A general who knows the battlefield better than his enemy. Think about Alejandro, a talented artist who meets a woman at a gallery. He texts her the next day, no reply. 3 days later, he follows up. Silence. A week later, he sends a clever meme. Still nothing. Alejandro's mistake? Predictability. Machiavelli would have said, "He who believes new benefits will make people forget old injuries is deceived." In other words, no amount of extra effort can erase the damage of being predictable. Women don't reject men, they reject patterns. The man who texts twice, 3 times, hangs around her social media, waiting like a starving dog outside a butcher shop, he's already lost. But the man who vanishes, he becomes a ghost she can't exorcise.
In 1511, a condottiero named Fabrizio Colonna abandoned a siege mid-battle, leaving his enemies completely confused. They had prepared for attack, not absence. Within days, paranoia tore the city apart from the inside. The same principle applies to attraction. When you withdraw without warning, you trigger what psychologists now call loss aversion, the human tendency to fear loss more than we desire gain. Think about it. Remember the last time someone stopped liking your posts or replying to your messages out of nowhere? How many times did you check their profile after that? That itch, that restless energy, that wasn't love. It was withdrawal. Studies show dopamine spikes higher when rewards are unpredictable. Slot machines exploit this. So do high-value men who understand how to manage presence and absence. The courtesans and queens of history mastered this instinctively. Take Lucrezia Borgia, one of the most infamous femme fatales of the Renaissance. At her banquets, she'd ignore a chosen guest all evening, giving him nothing. And just as the party ended, she'd send him a single glass of wine. That small gesture, delayed, ambiguous, drove men to madness. Why? Because it planted the idea that he might be chosen, but not yet. That uncertainty became obsession. The modern translation is simple. When someone pulls away, you don't chase. You mirror the distance. You vanish. Not angrily, not dramatically, but with indifference. No posts aimed at them. No last word texts. You simply live as if you have better things to do. And when you reappear, it's without explanation. The energy is, I was elsewhere. The world is wide. That's not manipulation. It's leverage.
Machiavelli himself said, "What you do not enforce, you do not demand." If someone expects your attention, the most powerful move is to remove the expectation. Let them wonder if they ever had it at all. Strategic withdrawal isn't about sulking, it's about reframing the entire dynamic. But here's the twist. What happens when she calls your bluff? What happens when she senses the strategy and flips it on you? This is where Machiavelli delivers his most dangerous lesson. Rome, 1503, Pope Alexander VI lies dying, poisoned, very likely by his own son, Caesar Borgia. The man who mastered Europe through deception and terror had been undone by someone even closer. Machiavelli recorded it with chilling detachment. He who seeks to deceive will always find someone willing to be deceived. And that's the ultimate danger. If your entire approach is tactical, scarcity, withdrawal, performance, you may win short-term, but eventually someone will outplay you. Let's dissect Daniel. He's absorbed every tactic out there. He withholds attention, he plays the scarcity game, he never texts first. It works, for a while. But then his lover tests him. She posts a story with another man, just ambiguous enough to sting. Daniel's stomach drops, his fingers hover over his phone. In that moment, his mask cracks. Machiavelli's verdict: he who is the cause of another's advancement is thereby the cause of his own ruin. Daniel's error wasn't strategy, it was dependency. He had replaced begging with games, but the hunger was still there. And here's the real truth.
Power doesn't come from manipulating someone else's interest. Power comes from not needing to.
When Lorenzo de' Medici wanted to destroy a rival, he didn't attack directly. He smothered him with gifts, lands, titles, even a marriage into his family. The rival, drunk on false security, grew complacent, and when his guard was down, Lorenzo's assassins struck. The lesson? What looks like power often hides weakness, and that applies to relationships too. If someone can sense your strategy but still feel your need, they'll eventually call your bluff, and you'll crumble. That's why Machiavelli's real teaching isn't just about tactics, it's about sovereignty. And sovereignty rests on 3 pillars. 1. The death of validation. Machiavelli's most dangerous idea wasn't even in The Prince. It was in a private letter. Never attempt to win by force what can be won by deception. But here's the missing piece. Deception is still weakness. A man who fakes indifference while obsessively checking her Instagram is no different from an alchemist turning lead into fool's gold. True power is deleting the app, not to punish her, but to free yourself. 2. The economy of attention. In 1512, the Republic of Florence collapsed because it wasted resources chasing wars it couldn't win. Your attention is your kingdom. Every DM, every like, every midnight scroll through her profile is a leak in that kingdom. Machiavelli wrote, "The first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men he has around him." The same principle applies. What surrounds you more, her ghost or your purpose?
3. The nuclear option. When King Ferdinand of Spain suspected betrayal, he didn't just confront it, he erased cities, entire bloodlines. Now, you don't need to go that far, but you do need the same foundation, the ability to walk away, not as a tactic, as a birthright. The moment someone senses you can't, you've already lost. This isn't about women. It's about reconstruction. That sinking feeling in your stomach when she takes hours to reply, that isn't love. That's withdrawal from the drug of her validation. Neuroscience proves it. Romantic rejection lights up the same brain pathways as cocaine addiction. Machiavelli didn't need an MRI to see it. He knew it instinctively. And the men who shaped history, Borgia, the Medici, Napoleon, didn't rise because they won women. They rose because they transcended the need to. That's Machiavelli's brutal truth. You were never fighting her. You were fighting the part of yourself that still believes love is something to earn. But what happens after sovereignty? What lies beyond power, beyond desire? That's the real rabbit hole. Because when you stop chasing validation, you start chasing something far more dangerous and far more freeing: legacy. And that's where this journey really begins. Drop the word legacy in the comments below if you're ready for the next level. And make sure to watch the next video because the rabbit hole goes deeper and the most important lessons are still to come.